We had such a wonderful experience with you 4 weeks ago. We're very glad to be back. And you may recall that we opened up last time with Ed giving us a short teaching around formal openings, bring our minds together as one to be able to do this work well. Today, it's my opportunity to offer that opening. And the way we're going to do it is with a poem. And it's a poem that was written by Deirdre Lee and published December 3rd, 2020 in Canadian Art magazine. It's called A Digital Land Acknowledgement, A Digital Land Acknowledgement. As I read this poem, I invite you to settle in. You have had a day, and yet here you are. There's so many other places you could be, and yet here you are. So settle in, feel the ground underneath you, take a deep breath, and let this poem wash over you. Deirdre Lee's A Digital Land Acknowledgement. Step 1, read this poem aloud, ideally outside in the sun so the trees and the wind can listen in. If this makes you roll your eyes, stop, go away, have a nap, try again. Step 2, learn what unseated means. Understand that this is just the beginning. Step 3, be present with feelings of being uncomfortable or embarrassed. You could probably use the practice, realizing these feelings are not life-threatening. Step 4, locate yourself, specifically, geographically. Time for Q&A, time to know, time to say, whose traditional territory do you live and breathe and work and love upon? Who was here for thousands of years before you? Step 5, recognize that although Indigenous peoples are ancient, we are also still alive. Resist the urge to mythologize, reject what little, if anything, you've been taught in school or in most media. Embrace this truth. You have no idea. Step 6, it's not your job to fix this. Or it is, but as an accomplice, you are not the boss, no matter your activist street cred. In this, you are a rookie. Let go of expectation, of being in charge, of being lauded, of getting an ally cookie. Step 7. 7 generations, 7 teachings, 7 months to 70, 1752 treaty. Elders and youth are rising, are speaking. Are you listening? Are you learning? Step 8, infinity. Pace yourself on this journey. This is not an on-off switch. This is no magic spell scenario. This is more like encouraging plants to grow. Nurture your skills and heart. Absorb, process, try, mess up, rest, restart. Step 9. This guide is not permanent or definitive or chronological. There's no such thing as linear time. This work doesn't come with a finish line. Back over to Priya and Amy.
Thank you so much to Dr. Nixon for that opening. We are so pleased to welcome everyone back today and to continue offering these sessions as a collaboration between the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists of Ontario and the College of Opticians of Ontario. I'm going to turn it over to Priya now for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Amy. My name is Priya Singh. I am with the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists of Ontario, and I acknowledge that as a second-generation settler, I have had the opportunity to enjoy the abundance of land and resources of Turtle Island. I also acknowledge that Turtle Island has been cared for by many Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis peoples and communities since time immemorial. Castle Poe offices are located in the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Our location is also covered by Treaty 13. Acknowledging these traditional territories is one way for me to recognize the rights and history of the people who were here before me. My work is guided with the Dish with One Spoon Treaty that teaches us to live on these lands with respect, nonviolence, and sustainability. I work to seek a new relationship with those who were here before me to contribute to a better future for all. With that acknowledgement, I'd like to offer a few reminders before we get started. If possible, please close all other running programs and applications to improve your connectivity on today's platform. If you are experiencing technical issues, please exit and re-enter or log back into the session. And if that does not address the issues, please contact us in the email addresses located in the chat, and we will try to assist. Turning back to Amy.
Thank you, Priya. So as with the first session, today's recording will be posted to both the websites of Castle Poe and COO. So we will be in touch with you when those are ready and available for viewing. For Castle Poe registrants, remember that you can access the recording on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion e-forum page. And viewing of this session today can be counted toward your self-assessment tool, your learning goals. So there are some email addresses being provided to you in the chat with any questions for that. For our COO registrants, you can access the recording on the free on-demand continuing education page of our website. And this session has been accredited for 1 hour of professional growth. Certificates of completion will be emailed for all of those in attendance today. And those of you who are watching this as a recording will follow the process in your QA portal to receive a certificate of completion. And again, if you have any questions about that, there is an email address in the chat.
So today's presentation is intended for educational purposes. If you have any questions during the session, please enter them into the Q&A feature on your screens. You will note that the chat feature is not directly available. As a reminder, we are here to learn, and so we ask that your questions and comments be open-minded. And we'd like to offer a content warning that some of the material reviewed in today's presentation may be unsettling. We encourage you to take time for self-care when needed. You can return to the recordings at a later time, and Castle Poe and COO staff are available for any follow-up questions you may have.
So with those items covered, we're very excited to welcome back today's speakers, Tecumseh and Dr. Stephanie Nixon. So as mentioned during our first session, Tecumseh, also known as Dr. Ed Connors, is of Mohawk ancestry from Kahnawake Mohawk territory and of Irish ancestry. Today, his discussion will offer traditional knowledge about healing and his experience as a retired psychologist. Dr. Stephanie Nixon, who you also have just heard from this morning, offers consulting based on the coin model of privilege, which she developed as a way to translate core ideas about anti-oppression and anti-racism to people in positions of unlearned advantage like herself. You can find resources created by both Ed and Stephanie, including about the coin model of privilege, at their website, which we are dropping in the chat. So with that introduction, we are turning the session now back over to Stephanie and to Ed.
Ooh, thank you for that very, very warm welcome. Greetings, everyone. Now all 350 of us in the room together. It's so impressive that you have these professions that care so deeply about these ideas, that this many are gathering to deepen our collective understanding. I want to bring back some of the slides we started with in the first session to re-ground us of what are we doing here anyways? What is the goal for these two sessions and for today? And you'll recall that Ed and I set up this idea of mind maps. This isn't a checklist kind of topic, is it? It's mind maps, ways of thinking. And our plan was to introduce 3 of them to you. And the whole idea was to offer those mind maps as a way of getting our thoughts around power. privilege? What does it mean for our work within healthcare, health education, health leadership, health research, regulation, all of it? And ideally to walk us to a different orientation for action. We reminded ourselves that it's the sort of new way of thinking about things that allows us to much more robustly engage with some of the commitments that we've already made. So for instance, we shared COO's code of ethics to say, you know, already this is a field that's dedicated to ethical practice, to trust and respect, to integrity, etc. What might an even more sophisticated analysis of what those commitments means looks like? And similarly, we refer to the Castlepoe Guide for Equitable and Inclusive Services, a marvelous document that spells out a range of commitments that on the surface, it feels like, of course, we're dedicated to this. What's often missing is a nuanced analysis of what does it mean to deliver on them. And so it's the 3 mind maps that we're hoping will be helpful to each of you in moving forward your thinking. We offer that because it's been helpful to Ed and me. We've been engaging with trying to understand what these mind maps give us. So we're in dialogue with you today as we collectively try to make sense of how to build a better future together. So the 3 mind maps, the first session, we introduced one of them, and it was a metaphor of a coin, and it represented the power over mentality that we've been socialized into for thinking about difference. Now that is a lot. And I think most folks probably were either at the first session or watched a recording. So hopefully that rings a bell. Some of you might not have done either and might be joining us for the first time today, and you're very welcome here. We're going to move as if you have a grounding in this first mind map and give most of our time to the second and third. But we will have a short visit through the coin on our way to handing it off to Ed, because today, if the coin model teaches us, brings into the light, makes thinkable that we have been socialized into a power over mindset that we've been taught is not a mindset at all, it's just the way things are. We're like, no, that's just one way of doing. What we tried to make possible, thinkable, imaginable by the end of part 1 is that there could be an alternative. Right? That was the cliffhanger. And so today we come back with Mind Map 2, where Ed is going to offer us a beautiful teaching around the 2-row wampum belt treaty, which offers an alternative teaching to the power over, power with. So Ed will offer us that second mind map, and then together we'll say, well, if we take power over and consider it against power with, what does this mean for action? And the third mind map we're going to call assimilation versus transformation, and offer you that lens for trying to make sense of, well, what would I do now if I was moving in a way that was aligned with power with instead of power over? At the very end of the session, we're going to slow down, no more new content, and instead give you a few questions for you to work with, to digest what you've been learning. What's your new lessons to take today? You'll recall that our approach to this learning is to scaffold ideas. It's to revisit and grow. And that the invitation for each of us, including Tecumseh and myself, is to do the meta work, watch ourselves be in this learning and unlearning, to identify what are our gifts to take today, what are the little gems that you're going to pick up along the way. And one of the ways we're going to do that is both with individual and collective sense making and doing it, learning by doing. Whew. So a deep breath. We've opened, we've introduced. Let me offer us a short reminder about this coin model. We call it the coin model of privilege, the first mind map. Just bring this back to your mind, and then we'll hand over the floor to Ed. So first, I'm going to invite you to do it in your own head. There was a coin, it was a metaphor. How many parts did it have? Yes, it had 3 parts. What were those 3 parts? See if you can call them up in your own mind's eye. Part of this work is that we're never meant to be able to know this, right? Or to remember it. And so it's like building a muscle. It's like, woof, once we build sort of the foundation of the strength, the grounding of this metaphor as a lens, it comes so easily. But until then, we're never meant to remember it. So let's do it together. It's got 3 parts. The parts are the coin, and the top and the bottom. That's right. And they help us address a question. The question is, what's my work to do? For each of us, what's my work to do? And you recall that the answer to that question is, it depends. It depends on which side of the coin we find ourselves. Okay? So what was that coin metaphor? What were the coin itself? What did that represent in this metaphor? Do you remember? And there's a number of ways to give it language. It's the ideas that matter the most. But the language we're going to give it today is system of inequality. A system of inequality, a big structure. So this isn't about just some individuals. This is about a social, political, economic forces. These coins are entrenched. They've been baked into the fabric of society. We might not like them, but we cannot opt out of society. You know, like the speech language pathology as a field didn't come up outside of society, right? All these fields that we're part of, healthcare, higher education, even how we do webinars, it didn't happen outside of society, it happened within. And therefore they've been influenced and shaped by these intersecting systems of inequality or systems of oppression. Because here's the thing about them, they're historic. None of us invented these coins. No one here, none of the 374 in the room invented these coins, these systems of oppression. But every single one of us inherited them. It's just that we often don't know it. Yeah, and we're not meant to. That's why we're spending this time saying, what was that metaphor, right? Because we're not meant to know about coins. In fact, we're only meant to know about people who receive unearned disadvantage from them, right? So where we find ourselves on top or bottom of the coin is not anything we do or earn. It's just where we find ourselves structured in history, right? Because these coins were designed very intentionally by some to extract resources from, to gain power over others. And over time, these ideas, these norms, these isms, racism, colonialism, ableism, heterosexism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and on and on and on they go. These norms have sort of taught us that the top of the coin isn't a position of unearned advantage, but it's just normal. Nothing to see here, nothing to name, just normal. And in fact, don't even need to know there's a coin. All you need to know is about marginalized populations, vulnerable groups, the hard to reach. If we frame the problem exclusively as the bottom of the coin, that's the misdiagnosis we've been taught. We will never have to confront the cause of inequity, which is the system of oppression, or the complicity, usually unwittingly, of folks on the top in upholding it because we didn't even know it was something to resist. And one of the final lessons was you can't take any of these coins on their own. They intersect. Intersectionality, a beautiful concept gifted to us from Black feminist scholars back from the historically, the Combahee River Collective, made popular by Kimberly Crenshaw. Intersectionality, this idea that systems of oppression, they intersect to create complex arrangements of advantage and disadvantage. And so we landed at the end of part one with these takeaway messages about a call to reorient ourselves, to resist, to move away from what seems to be like what's wrong with the before? You know, I use my expertise to help marginalized groups deal with inequities. What's wrong with that? That's usually the basis of most EDI. Our proposal is everything. Everything is wrong with that. And the reason is because it presumes that the problem that needs fixing is the marginalized groups and that the help they need is from folks on the top of the coin. What it does is misses the point that the coin is the issue and the ways that we all, top and bottom, but especially top of coin, uphold it. And so the reorientation that was offered up is, maybe instead of this urge to help, right, altruism, maybe let me slow down on that. What if instead I start with, I see and understand my own role in upholding systems of oppression that have produced these inequities. And maybe I learned, maybe it's not them people on the bottom that need my help. Maybe it's me on the top of those coins that need the help of the experts on the bottom of the coin. And maybe it's my job to take action, accountable action, in solidarity with and with accountability to community leaders on the bottom of the coin. And a big part of this, sort of the accountable action, the not just rushing to act, But accountable action in our lane when you're on the top of a coin is this invitation to move from a power over to a power with mentality. Oh. So if that's one way of thinking about power over, Ed, can we call you in to give us a teaching about the two-row wampum belt treaty, please?
Certainly can. And as I reintroduce myself to you, I'm going to show you the two-row wampum and this belt and introduce it to you. But as I introduce it to you, I'm reintroducing myself to you. You may recall when I introduced myself last time we met, and as was done with the introductions today, it was indicated that I come from, in essence, two sides of the river, that river being the St. Lawrence River. And in coming from two sides, my one side of the river is our community of Ganawage, Mohawk territory. So that's where my mother was born and raised. And I've also indicated that my father was born and raised of Irish ancestry on the town of Mount Royal overlooking Montreal. And that there's a bridge that connects the two sides of that river. And I've spoken of that bridge as being a link between those two worlds, those two worldviews. And that's certainly symbolic of how I've come to be. And my presence in life comes about because my parents, coming from two sides of the river, actually met, and that bridge facilitated their meeting. And as a result of that, I came to be. But I came to be, and I came into this world being gifted with the opportunity to be able to see the world from two worldviews, from two different minds, or as we've talked about as mind maps. And that those different minds are very different, often not recognized by people who come from the dominant mind, or as we've referred to as the power over. That mind that has produced a way of thinking that replicates continuously thinking of that oppresses others. Interestingly enough, in my history, my grandfather, my father's father, was a member of the Legislative Assembly for Quebec for over 25 years, representing the town of Mount Royal. So in essence, I was born into, into the politics of that mind and the way that mind functions. He was a liberal, by the way. And I think of that today, that we're voting today about our leadership for this country. But that leadership is only one form of leadership, and it comes from that particular mind that came here from across the ocean. And that's a different mind from that of my ancestors and my family, my people who are from Ganawage, who actually carried a mind very different from those who came here in their ships. And I bring you in history to the time in 1613 when those people landed on the shores of Turtle Island, as we refer to it from an Indigenous perspective, and brought that different way of thinking to our people. And it's interesting because I've been studying this for many years, thinking about how is it that we came to be so different in the ways both that we think and act in our relationships with one another from these two different minds. Why is it that we act in such different ways and have very different forms of relationship? And as I've studied that, I've looked back into history and looked way back to the time when, in fact, we can say that all people on Mother Earth were in essence indigenous. Indigenous meaning we all came from a relationship with the earth, with Mother Earth. We all came from being in close relationship and seeing ourselves and having a mind that in fact did not see everything as different in a sense of less than, as seeing things as unequal to, as seeing everything, including humans, as unequal to. And then I question, how is it that when it seems that we thought that way for so long, the longest period of human history, we actually thought more in that way. And then we came to a point where we evolved or developed what we call civilization. And I said a question about evolution, if it really was evolving or devolving. Because with the form of mind that then developed as we created these large societies and large organizations, formed in such a way that it actually created then minds of difference. So why is this two row so important? And why is it so significant? Well, this two row is the ways that my ancestors, you know, as Indigenous people, and specifically Haudenosaunee, but many of our Indigenous people on Turtle Island, for long before we had contact with Europeans or those who came from across the ocean, we thought in such a way that we were always looking to understand how to create peaceful relationships with one another. Our minds were directed towards creating then peace amongst ourselves so that we could in fact promote our existence and to promote our stability within our communities and between our communities. And so we had many ways of thinking, many cultures across Turtle Island. And those cultures all had various ways of thinking and acting and behaving. And so we knew of difference. And we knew that in order to be able to create a good relationship that sustained peace, we had to actually form minds and maintain minds that recognized the difference as being something that was of value, something that we could actually use when we saw that difference was actually something that brought something useful to us, something more than what we had. So what happened with this? The two row was the way we made peace. So we created these types of what we call wampum belts as a way of signifying the relationship that we formed and the agreements that we formed with those who had difference from us. Interestingly enough, I can tell you for sure in 1613, when our ancestors, actually Haudenosaunee ancestors, when we met with the Dutch, we saw all the differences that existed between us and how they were different from us. And when we saw the differences, we recognized that not only were they different in language, but different in how they clothed themselves, the way they transported themselves in ships as opposed to our canoes. And there were so many differences that we acknowledged that, okay, so how do we live in peace if we have so many differences? How do we share what we have in this land of the resources? How do we do so in peace? And so this is where our mind came into action in creating the two-row wampum. This is what we presented to them in 1613. We presented to the Dutch this concept. And so what lies within the two-row are teachings about how to create that peaceful relationship. So what we know in this is that they said, you're in your ships going down the river of life. The two purple rows represent you and one in your ship and us in our canoe. We're going down the white or the river of life together. As long as we go down that river of life together and we do not cross into the path of the other, then we can live in peace on this land and share all the resources for the benefit of all. So what was that mind actually thinking beyond just that surface of, promoting that we don't cross into each other's path? Well, the mind of our Haudenosaunee ancestors, the Ongohoa, the Mohawk, what that mind was directing us to was, first of all, there's 3 white strips, and the 3 white strips actually then contain some of the teachings. And the teachings say that we first of all look at the difference that exists, your differences, and we look at it with respect. We look at it to learn what is of value to us that we can take from those teachings. And then secondly, once we look at what we can learn from one another with respect of our differences, it says we then also employ a mind that says we are equal to one another. We are no greater than nor less than. One of my elders taught me this in a teaching that I often share when I'm sharing these teachings with others. I call it the ant story or the ant teaching. And it goes like this. He said, we were sitting up on Lake of the Woods in a waiting for a group of elders and youth to come and share teachings. And we had set up a circle of chairs, and we had a big, what we call the powwow drum in the middle. And we were sitting waiting for them to arrive, and he was looking out on the beauty of the lake of the Woods, and he was seeing all of what the creation all around us. And he was just simply reflecting on that and saying, you see all of that out there? He said, that's all the gifts that Creator has given to us to help us to sustain our lives, to live long and good lives. And once we can develop our minds to think that way, we'll be able to live long and good lives. But as he's saying that, all of a sudden he stopped as he was sharing those words. And I looked at him, and his eyes were going down under my chair. And under my chair was this little ant that was walking into the circle. And as it walked into the circle, he pointed to it and he said, you see that ant? And I said, yes. And he said, that ant, he's my brother. He's no greater than I, and I'm no greater than him. We're brothers. And then he said, when we can form that mind again, we will know how to have peace on earth and live in peaceful relationship with each other and with all of creation. So I share that with you because that lies within this two-row teaching, the two-row belt. I also recognize, which is kind of interesting to me, that as I hold this to you and you can see it, I believe, can you show this, Stephanie? Just shift to this so that they can see this, the belt again.
Yeah, I think folks can see both the slide and your
Can they?
tongue holding up the belt.
Okay.
That's
Okay,
great.
so if you're seeing both, when I hold and I teach with this, we teach in this way, and my elders taught me that with the teachings of the wampum belts, it's important to teach them in this way because it connects us between earth and creation and creator. And so as I hold it up and I teach with it in this way, I also recognize today as I'm wearing this vest that I have, which I had made for me years ago when I was starting to understand these teachings and employ these teachings, I recognized that I had put the belt onto, or asked to have the belt placed on this vest in this way, but it goes crossways, which is really interesting because to me, because if I wear it today and I show you, you can actually see it. And in actual fact, as I hold it up like this, you can see, in essence, it forms a cross. So why is that important? Well, because that mind that came here was also heavily directed towards our Indigenous people across Turtle Island, from those who we called the Black Robes. Those who came with the teachings of the Church, of the Catholic Church specifically, and brought their teachings and then enforced them upon us. So today I think of it, though, that we're in this time of reconciliation. We're in a time where we believe that we're in a time of healing and a time that can lead us to a greater degree of peace. And what can guide us to that way of peace? Well, I suggest that the thinking that it exists within the two-row and that is actually present within Indigenous thought, as I've shared that with you, has the capacity to bring us back to where we were in 1613 when we offered these teachings. But then obviously it was power over as opposed to power with, which meant we were seen as less than, and everything we offered was not accepted. But I suggest that as I was reflecting on this as Pope Francis was going through his transition to this, as we call the spirit world, that he was one who has come to a greater understanding of the value of what the difference we offer has to all people and all of creation. He understood that better when he came and he offered the reconciliation with our Indigenous people. He understood it, and he offered ways in which as well from their direction that we once again can come to the teachings of the two-row and find peace. And maybe today as we're voting for leadership, we can keep that in mind, that we look for people who can have that vision, share that vision, and enact that vision upon our Mother Earth. And that's not just in this land on Turtle Island, but on all of Mother Earth. So I share that and pass that back to Stephanie for us to think of the next mind map that's tied to this.
Thank you, Ed. Just take a moment for folks to breathe. Reflect on some of the lessons you're taking from that teaching. I know a big one for me, Ed, I can still remember it's sort of the first, second, and third time you introduced this to me. It took a while to land this idea of difference and approaching it first as what's the same about us, different, and then difference as strength, difference as good news, as opposed to difference as something to be fit into a which is the right one and who's everybody else. And Ed, would you tell us that quote about how this teaching, although it was created way back in the 1600s, still stands today?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's so we believe from everything in the oral history as this belt was passed, through time to the present, that the words were said when this belt was shared with the Dutch, that it was said that to the Dutch that this shall stand for as long as the sun shall shine, as long as the rivers shall flow, and as long as the grass shall grow. In that lies the understanding of our ancestors, the Haudenosaunee, specifically Onkwohoa, as we actually understood that this was made with this agreement with Creator and with all of creation, and so that it stood forever. And so it stands to this day. So we do believe, that as it stands to this day, it still stands to guide us at this time, as I've suggested, in our current time and history and into the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ooh. So one way of thinking about differences among people, power over another being power with, difference as strength. The final mind map we're going to offer is a way of making sense of those together. And we're going to use the language of assimilation versus transformation. For those who can see color, you may see that assimilation is in red, as in problem. Transformation as in green, fertile, growth, let's go. So we're going to offer up a frame that says, if we're thinking this way, maybe my actions are based on assimilation, even though they might have good intentions. Whereas if I'm to shift and you get them aligned with this mindset, it leads to transformation. So this is an orientation for all of us for action. When we come to those questions, the big ones, but also the minutia, the micro in the day-to-day of like, what do I do now? What would action look like now if I was trying to be part of a power with future building orientation? So this is the final mind map. So first, we're going to consider assimilation versus transformation using the coin metaphor, and then we'll use the two-row metaphor, two-row teaching. Reminding us about this coin, you know this well now, these three parts. The question we want to bring to this now is, what are the different diagnoses of the problem to be addressed? So what are we framing as the problem in assimilation versus transformation? So if you think about, I'm concerned about this issue X, and I'm now thinking about going about it in this way. If you do that work of stepping back and saying, well, what am I assuming is the problem that needs fixing here? If we tune in and realize, you know what, I'm framing the problem that needs fixing as a community of people, then it's possible that what we're doing is all our actions are in the context of assimilation. That we may be helping on the surface, but fundamentally we're not changing the structure that produced that inequity in the first place. We're assimilating a community into the system of oppression that we've got. However, all of the actions that assume that the problem here to be addressed is the way that systems of oppression are baked into our fields, are baked into our classrooms, our clinics, our paperwork, our performance reviews, etc., our hiring practices. If we think that the problem that we're trying to understand and uproot is the system of oppression, that's green for go. That is transformation. And it's messy and it's hard because it's not role modeled for us very much. It requires experimentation and imagination and courage. But if you can think, all right, I think these actions are actually aligned with trying to uproot this system of oppression, then that is aligned with transformation. And if we are tuning into actions, especially of folks on the top of the coin that uphold systems of oppression, that's also aligned with transformation. None of this is to say that finding oneself on the top of the coin means you're a bad person. We're not saying that folks who sit in positions of privilege themselves are bad. It's just who we are. What's bad are our actions that uphold the systems of oppression. Anyone can do it, but it especially is done by folks on the top. So assimilation versus transformation. Ed, over to you.
So what you are seeing now is an image that actually it was published in a book prior to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was part of the initial work that was done looking into the status and the experiences and the history of, in essence, oppression that was placed upon Indigenous people on Turtle Island, and specifically that of what has happened within the Canadian context. So the book that was published was a book looking at the experiences of residential schools that were created in order to take, as they said, and the history is well documented now because it was stated within our leadership within the Canadian Parliament, that the purpose of the residential schools was to take the Indian out of the child. This particular picture is of the same child within hours of going from the community, his community, into actually then into a residential school. And as they often say, a picture tells more than 1,000 words. When we look at it, it actually then brings our attention to the fact that the efforts being made were to change that child from the ways that they were in all forms as being Indigenous to become assimilated into the experiences of the Canadian form that was at that point taking shape. And so what was in behind this? It was the thinking that those that came here had, that form of thought, that worldview that said that in essence everybody needs to be the same, and they need to be the same as us, and that we in essence have it right, and that everything that we know and think and the ways we think need to be replicated, including the language. And that means then they will in fact fit in. Now, it must be remembered that when this was taking place and the efforts were being made to then take thousands, hundreds, we had hundreds thousand of our children who were placed into these schools across the country over a period of from the 1800s right up to 1996, I think it was, when the last one was closed. And in that time, the effort was being made, of course, to change the minds of our children to be that of the dominant that was becoming dominant Canadian forms of being. Now, I think of this even today as I think of what that meant, not only to Indigenous people, but to all people. And all those who in fact come to this land now from other countries, coming with different experiences. I look at it in terms of my wife and what happened with her family as they came from the Ukraine and settled in central Canada as farmers, and how some of their family, in fact, in order to feel that they could fit in and be successful in business in Canada, felt that they had to change their name from Kristalovich to Christie. I think of it in terms of my Irish ancestors who came from Ireland, escaping oppression there. And then, of course, the Ukraine, they were escaping oppression from Russia. And as in Ireland, we were escaping from the British oppression. And I think of them and how our name, as I look at our history, our family history, from what I could see, was at one point in time O'Connor, but they dropped the O and added an S in order to be successful in Canada. So the whole experience has been one of changing minds, not only of Indigenous people, but in essence of all people. And not valuing, as we say, difference, but rather seeing difference as something less than, and therefore something that leads to oppressive behaviors towards those who are different. So the goal in the end of transformation is really about making space and place for all people to be who they are, not to have to be somebody different in order to fit in. When we look at it, today in envisioning transformation, and we can use the two-row to consider it, from an Indigenous perspective, we had, in essence, a mind, as I've described, that was really holistic in its form. Even today, as we think about Indigenous health and wellness, we speak of it and articulate it as holistic health, mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. That form of thought is what I also, is formed in terms of the ways of thinking about peace from an Indigenous worldview, about forming friendship on the basis of equality and respect. But yet, those in the ship that continue to maintain that worldview are often looking at life from a very different worldview, which is reductionistic and also leads to then oppressive thinking as those who are less than. And that's the current system that we have currently in Canada primarily. It's guided by, the mind that tends to, in essence, be oppressive in its ways of relating with each other and with all of creation, and disconnected in actual fact from all of creation. And that's part of the real challenge that we have today, that as humans, our minds have taken shape such that we distance ourselves from all of creation as being lesser than. Not only is it the ant that is lesser than, but all of creation is viewed as lesser than. And the end result is that we struggle to sustain our own existence because we continue to see everything as lesser than as opposed to equal to. My efforts in life today continue to be to reform that form of thought of my ancestors of the Haudenosaunee Niongwahoe, to form that way of thinking again that my elders have taught me, such that we can actually, and that I can, then live in relationship with each other, with all of creation, with Creator, in that form of equal thought. And that's what I attempt to form in my own life, and what I attempt to teach with my children and my grandchildren. And I pray for this day and the days to come that we continue to think that way and develop that form of thought and redevelop it, because again, as I pointed out, at one point in time, all of humans on Mother Earth had that form of thought. And I believe we have the capacity to form it once again. That is part of what I believe lies within the context and the thinking about reconciliation, which I ultimately refer to as peacemaking.
Thank you, Ed. A deep breath. An invitation to reflect on what's landing for you. Three mind maps. This idea of a coin to help us understand this particular mentality we've been socialized into, which says there needs to be one right way. And the offering of an alternative, power with the two-row wampum belt. And sometimes it's taken me, I still catch myself thinking, so is Ed teaching us that we shouldn't have any colonial approaches to medicine, any Western approaches to medicine anymore? It's like, no, that's actually the colonial mind that says there has to be only one. The invitation is to say, no, there's strength in all of these different ways of approaching health and wellness. And we'll all be better if we can make space and respect for them. We are going full circle thinking about, so what does this mean? What are the lessons we're learning now, given each of us in our role in relation to healthcare? Get specific here. For each of us in our role in relation to healthcare, our day-to-day, what we see as our work to do. This is the invitation to grab a pen or grab your phone, go to your notes section and write yourself one bullet, just a quick bullet. See where it takes you. We've got 2 questions for you. And the first is, what's come to light as a question that's deeply important for you to address? What's come to light as a question that's deeply important for you to address? Ed teaches us all the time that it's not always getting the answers right that matters the most. It's getting to the right questions in the first place. So this is your invitation. What question is coming to light for you now as deeply important? And then related, how are you going to go about finding the answers to those questions? So let's take a quiet moment to write to yourself. We also have the Q&A function. If there's anything that you want to offer back to Ed and me, we'll just take a quiet moment to let some of this settle. You're about to have a busy day. Take this few moments to just let these stories land, these teachings land. What has come to light as a question that's deeply important for you? No rush here. We got lots of time. Go inward. What are you feeling? What are you sensing? What feels muddy? What are you feeling curious about? Shot yourself a bullet. Ed, I want to share with you some of the reflections that are coming up in the Q&A. These are wise participants, one person asks, how can we make this right? And another asks, how can I gain my native language back? I'll maybe offer a short reflection on the first and then turn it to you, Ed, to say every time I sort of feel like, this is on fire. What do I do? I remind myself this teaching I've gotten over and over again, that just because I'm new to the struggle doesn't mean the struggle is new. These struggles have been going on for decades and often centuries, and they've been waiting for us to show up in our lane. The instructions are there. The communities leading these transformations are there. It's how do we show up humbly? How do we listen? How do we join? Realize this is not about individualistic saving. This is about joining collective action. That's sort of one of the ways I do my own self-talk. Ed, over to you.
I'll address the second, that with regards to language, and it's really important for all people that have the opportunity to learn your languages that come from your ancestry, and wherever possible, where there are teachers, I know the teachers within our Indigenous communities want to teach, and I've met them over time, and some of what I've learned has come from them. But it's the ways. It's actually within, and this is what my elders told me many times, that it's our languages that keep our ways of thinking alive, and help us to know truly who we are, because it gives us the ability to be able to see the world in the ways that I've described to you today. And that's where you can truly get that. It's not absolutely necessary, because you can learn in English similar translations, but it's not exact. And so if you really are committed to and wish to learn that and understand that fully, that's the way to go about it, is to actually reconnect with elders and teachers. And they're all over the place now. I continue to meet them on an almost a daily basis as I continue with my work and my learning. So they're there if you wish to reach out to them. They're more than welcome. They're more than wanting to do so. So yeah, it can be done. I know many of, even one of my teachers, who is actually he's a faith keeper in our community of Ganawage. So he's faith keeper for one of our longhouses, with our traditional teachings, and he actually began learning our language at age 26, and he's fluent now, and he teaches in the language and teaches within our immersion school, has taught in our immersion school in Ganawage, and now teaches in one of our college level teaching programs. So yeah.
Ed, thank you. I'm going to offer one more reflection, then turn it to you to close us. And then
Sure.
just after a couple minutes of your close, we'll throw it back to Amy and Priya to offer their final words. So just briefly, one of the other questions that came up in the Q&A was, how do we make it better? How do we make it better? And I just wanted to offer that from the perspective of someone who sits on the top of a lot of coins, the way that I try to attend to that question is tune into which coins am I on the top of? And then do the deep learning of how that ism operates and how I am co-opted into it, because we all need to get freed from these oppressive structures. So that's a sort of an immediate next step, is that tuning into that's what I need to learn more about now so that I can free myself from it. All right, Ed, over to you to close us up.
Thank you, Stephanie. So as we close and you see this image, I believe I've shared it with you previously, that this is gifted to me as a picture from one of my elders, and I continue to learn from it. The simple teaching that is so powerful within it is all about how the world is not really, and our astronauts certainly have pointed this out as they look at Mother Earth from space, there aren't red lines dividing all of the countries on the globe, on Mother Earth. And it's, almost our children that we need to look to actually understand that more fully, because our children actually naturally don't see difference the way we do. They get socialized into seeing difference. And so, it's really a teaching here about, to get to the place of really understanding how to create this world that is one globe, one world. We need to be able to change our minds from the minds that in fact focus so much on difference and division as a result of that mind of power over, that leads to power over and oppression. So as I think of that, I actually will share with you that I shared with you, how that's impacted so many different people on Mother Earth, to not feel comfortable being who they are, where they are on Mother Earth, and that often they end up trying to become something different in order to feel accepted and to fit in. And I think of that today as I think of my hairstylist, who is from Lebanon. And he, in fact, as I've met him and got to know him over the years, when I first met him and I asked him about who he was, and he sort of slowly began to share his story of coming to Canada, and he's been in Canada for many years. But I realized that I asked him, who are you in your own language? And who have you been? Who were you born into? As is your name? And he kind of quietly whispered to me, as he was doing my hair, that his name as he was born was Malik. But he said, in order to be able to make a living in Canada, he said he was told as he started to work in Canada that he had to change his name to Mark. And so for many years, that's how he has been. But so when you ask, how do we change these things? Well, I think we start by simply living and enacting relationships that again break those barriers down, the ways of thinking of division, and encourage us to be accepting of each other fully as who we are, and accept, as we've spoken about, the differences as in fact being of benefit to us and to all. So if we can shape a world, like that, as I think our children vision before we change their minds, perhaps we can then create what we've talked about today as the world that is one that I think many desire, which is a world that is peaceful and breaks away from the conflict and the oppression that we place upon each other. So I leave you with those thoughts and look forward to what in future we may learn together and also then enact together. So yeah, I wish you all peace.
Thank you, Ed, for those beautiful words. You caught me. Thank you again for sharing your insights and your thoughts. I think your comments about difference as a strength have really resonated with me as a person. And really the thoughts around making space for everybody to be who they are in, I think, a more peaceful world. I think it's fair to say from Castle Poe and COO, we are extremely grateful for the time, the energy, and the care that you have offered to us and our registrants to share your experiences with us. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. I see lots of positive feedback coming through, so I don't think I've overstepped in making that comment. Amy, over to you.
I could not have put that any better than Priya just did. So I also echo our thanks on behalf of both the COO and Castle Poe. And to everyone who took the time to join us today, thank you for that. And as mentioned earlier, the recordings will be available on both of the college's websites. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you have a wonderful afternoon and we appreciate the time that everyone has taken today.